Welcome to the Healthcare Nation podcast. I'm your host, Rick Janata, and happy to be here with another episode. And as has been our practice in the past, we like to cover what's new and noteworthy at month's end and in the beginning of the next month. And our producer, Joe, has been tasked with curating what's out there in the world of the Healthcare Nation and pulling it together and putting it out there for a quick podcast for our viewers. So with that said, a quick disclosure, the podcast is intended for informational purposes only. And with that said, Joe, what's on your mind? What do we hear that's new and noteworthy?
The collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank is the first thing that comes to mind as new and noteworthy. The SVB sent their collapse sent shockwaves through the healthcare industry, and with many healthcare startups and venture capital firms, we're just left in a precarious financial situation. So can you bring us up to speed on what that means and really what happened?
Yeah, look, first, let me just put this out there. There was light at the end of the tunnel. I think things have stabilized. That's a good thing. But let me try to unpack some of the calculus that went into this, including from a policy perspective. So first, SVB, and full disclosure, I've worked with them, with some of my clients in the past, and a really solid group of individuals there. And they were the financial partner for many healthcare and health tech companies, which was essential for the innovation and growth as they went on their path from ideation to commercialization. I mean, that's just a reality. And I really do believe that at least initially, a lot of that shockwaves that you mentioned were felt acutely in the digital health space. And it did, get the cackles up on a lot of folks and certainly colleagues of mine. But put it in perspective, a sector that had been flush with cash just a few years ago when the pandemic fueled what I would say a surge in digital health and telehealth adoption, right? This was a big deal. Banks and investment firms saw that, and they were eager to support a lot of these incredibly innovative ideas. And from a policy side, the administration reduced barriers for telehealth adoption, obviously critical for the expansion and scaling of that, and also changed reimbursement, which further fueled growth in the sector and added, obviously, cash that created an incentive. But let's put it this way, with the end of the pandemic, not that it's over, but for many, let's want to declare it in the past, as well as a struggling economy, a lot of organizations and enterprises started to reassess their innovation strategies. And some of the startups needed to show value and demonstrate return on investments faster than before. There was some concern about SVB. There was some communication, perhaps, that was disproportionate with respect to its impact factor, and that led to what we could say was a run on the bank. Now, as I said, there was a brighter, light that's going to come with respect to First Citizens. But I do want to say this, I'd be remiss if I didn't. I do believe that in the longer term, the industry, particularly the health sector, will be more resilient and stronger, and startups and investors will understand a little bit more about the need for diversification and some of the maneuvers that they'll have to put in place that will support innovation, growth, and their strategy. But at the end of the day, look, the collapse did underscore some principles, and it's the importance of financial stability for any company, diversification, and I think this is particularly important if you're a healthcare startup. And from a policy side, I think our policymakers, and particularly in health policy, need to understand what happened if we're going to continue to support that innovation and invest in the health sector kind of across the board.
So, all right, next question is what or who is First Citizens Bank?
Oh, this is a great question. Anyone who spent any time in North Carolina knows First Citizens Bank, although now they're national. They're a Raleigh, North Carolina-based lender, been around for many, many years. I think it's the largest family-run business country or family-run bank in the country, large asset. And since 2008, they've been, acquiring a lot of other banks. I think they're upwards of 20 banks since that time. And how does the acquisition affect SVB customers? Well, the 17 former branches of Silicon Valley Bank are now under the control of First Citizens. So I see that as a good thing. Obviously, it wasn't First Citizens alone. I think the FDIC obviously played a big part of this. But one feature, if I could say, aside from the stability that this brought to the table, and we're seeing a lot of that now being played out in the stock market and the market in general, is that being a Raleigh, North Carolina bank initially, and certainly historically, as their base, it's also the home of Research Triangle Park. So there could be a positive lift for RTP and some of the startups in the tech industry that have made Research Triangle Park in North Carolina their home. So we shall see.
So on a broader note then, will this acquisition end the banking crisis?
Gosh, I mean, look, it's all cyclical. The disclosure should have called out that I am not an expert in banking. That's number one. But I do believe across the board, investors are relieved at the acquisition. Clearly, that was a positive. But we've got to remember the factors that led to the collapse, right? Rising borrowing costs, cratering asset valuations can continue to cause further banking stress across the board. But there was a lot to learn, and hopefully, retrospectively, people will see this and it'll be taken into account as they make the prudent financial decisions I know these folks can make.
All right, changing gears, can you provide more information on the FDA's decision to allow over-the-counter Narcan?
Yeah, so Narcan, look, it's naloxone. First, let me tell you what it is. It's a medication that's used to reverse the effects of opioid overdose. Very effective medication. And the FDA's decision to allow Narcan to be sold over the counter is a big deal. Why? Because ready access to this drug in a home, in an environment where, folks may be using opioids is essential. And the only way you can get that is if you historically was with a prescription. So having it OTC is a big, big deal. It's very significant. And we know that opioid overdoses, major public health crisis across the board. We're seeing this even with some zombie drugs that are out there. And the hope is that more lives will be saved. More people can receive the help they need to overcome opioid addictions. And one of those, obviously we want to get to the root problem. But this is an intervention, right? This is a measure, certainly a countermeasure that happens if there was an overdose. So it's a very good thing.
What are the obstacles to the widespread use of Narcan?
So, I think if you break it down, there is cost and stigma. I would say that. First of all, again, it's a positive move. There's no doubt about it. But the bottom line is we don't know where the cost's going to land. But historically, Narcan can be expensive. That's a reality. And people may not be able to afford it, particularly the people who need it, who are using and want to have that around in their vicinity. Again, the access piece to that. The other piece is, I would say, the stigma, right? Folks feeling ashamed, embarrassed to seek help, to go to the pharmacy to ask for this, or even their family or loved ones. So these are obstacles. They need to be overcome. Education, awareness to reduce these stigmas have to be part of the dialogue as we roll this out. And I think it's again a really good thing, and let's make sure that we talk it up wherever we can. I mean, that's the bottom line here.
So switching gears to policy, what are the House GOP members pressing Biden's health secretary on regarding abortion and unaccompanied migrant kids?
Okay, so again, in the world of policy, look, we knew this was going to happen after the midterms. GOP members were going to, call into question a lot of things, pandemic being one of them, as well as accompanied migrant children and H&H, Health and Human Services issues across the board. So this issue with Becerra is specifically related to the administration's policies regarding abortion access for minors, and specifically those who cross the border without their parents, and as well as linking it through the federal funds that would pay for abortions. So this is a big deal, and obviously something that's on the mind of a lot of folks on the Hill, particularly the GOP and their constituents. I would say this, it's still being played out. But to answer you as specifically as I can, Joe, I would say the line of questioning reflects and is going to continue the ongoing political debate around, first of all, reproductive rights. We know that, but also immigration policy in the United States. And this is going to further be played out as we approach 2024 and the elections. And it's in some ways also tied to the ending of the public health emergency that's coming up in May. So that had certain crosswalks over to immigration policy. Again, I'm not going to speak to right now, but I think it's all tied together. So more to come. I'm not dodging this. I just think as we get closer to 2024, there's going to be a lot more that we'll be able to delve into.
Okay. So next question, what's the significance of medical device companies needing to prove that they're protected against cyber attacks?
Oh, again, this is another good move by the FDA, in my opinion. So medical device companies will need to provide evidence that they have adequate protections in place to guard against cyber attacks. I think this is a really big deal. If you take a look at the number of people who have everything from pacemakers, insulin pumps in hospitals, imaging machines, and the plethora of technology that we use in critical care, I mean, there's not a device that's out there that I would say probably is out of reach of some nefarious practitioners. So we got to think that through when you look at cyber attacks and hacking in general. So it's a big step. It's a positive step across the board. It also, I think, includes some steps to protect health information. That's a big move as well. And I think some of this is in response to some high-profile cyber attacks on hospitals and health systems, as well as healthcare providers, that it also included ransomware. So this is a good move. And I think for the industry across the board, certainly folks in health tech, they need to think about this moving forward. It could give them the kind of security and confidence that, look, we could scale faster and perhaps have more confidence in the folks who are going to use the devices that could change the healthcare landscape. And I see this as a positive by the FDA.
All right. So as we wrap up our wrap-up, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think final thoughts are really going to revolve around what's ahead for the healthcare nation. And what we've committed to do is really keep on our episode list things that are not only new and noteworthy, but also top of mind for healthcare executives, folks in the industry across the board, as well as innovators that really want to get their finger on the pulse of what's happening. So with respect to what's ahead, we're going to have, I think, a luminary in the world of digital health, chief medical officer from one of the leading companies. We're going to touch on everything from digital health, electronic health records, and scaling that really from the hospital into the home. We're going to look at ChatGPT, the implications of that in clinical practice, as well as its utilization as an adjunct to everything from histories and physicals to pre-authorizations. We're going to look at the future of nursing, which I think is absolutely an important topic, particularly when you look at shortages of critical healthcare providers, nurses in this case, and also the role of advanced practice providers in our healthcare delivery system. And then we're going to have, I think, a content expert to help us further understand the language of healthcare finance and economics and what's happening out there in the landscape and the ecosystem. The interoperability between a lot of the systems, some of the tools that we use to maneuver when we're looking at startups as well as running a hospital. So I think we got an exciting list of episodes coming up on the docket and really happy for that. So you keep your hands steady on the controls. And for our listeners out there, you can please find us on our website, healthcarenation.com. as well as tune in on Apple and Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also tune into the Healthcare Nation YouTube channel. So, Joe, looking forward to the next episode.